Danielle. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So this is our breakout session for student mindfulness groups, the do's and don'ts of what we found for our experience. Before we get into our introductions, we just kind of wanted to start off today with a quick sound meditation. So if everyone could go ahead and get yourselves comfortable.
So if you could get into what we call, with our junior high students, your mindful bodies, with your feet flat on the ground, with your back sitting up straight but not to the point of strain. And you can put your hands in your laps around the table. And when you feel comfortable, you can shift your gaze downward or gently close your eyes. We're going to be using a gong to create some sounds. And we ask that you open your ears and really listen when you can no longer hear the noise. If you could just put your hand up in the air to signal that you can no longer hear the gong, we're going to restrike it. We're going to go ahead and get started. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes and bring yourself back.
So this is just one of the many techniques that we've actually used with our groups. And we will kind of explain this a little bit later. We just wanted to give you a taste of something that we've actually implemented in our own practice. So, like we said, Sandra, I'm Danielle. We both recently graduated from Lewis University with our master's in clinical mental health counseling. And we are both currently active in the field as clinical counselors. We are working at Guiding Light Counseling Services, which is located in Woodridge, Illinois, and also at Taking Control Counseling Services, which is a private practice in North River, Illinois. At Guiding Light, which is kind of where this presentation will stem from our experience there more, we have conducted both individual and group therapy with students ages kindergarten to 12th grade.
During our graduate program, we had to gain 700 clinical hours, and during that time, we ran a lot of mindfulness meditation groups for junior high school age students, 6th to 8th grade. We learned a lot of effective ways to engage students and also to learn mindfulness for our own benefit. And it was kind of a test, trial, error, so we learned lots of do's and don'ts. So we want to share some of the do's and don'ts right away with you.
So our groups took place before and after school in a classroom setting. So one of the first things that we kind of learned was that kind of like how I'm gravitating toward the podium to hide, our students would often hide behind desks. So we kind of would encourage them to sit in chairs, either in like a half circle or a circle, to just encourage, that communication, make more of a personal connection, and just kind of unify them, which is a deal. We also learned that when groups took place before school, it seemed to be more effective. Before school had started, students were usually groggy and tired and, in more of a relaxed state. And so they were kind of in that mindfulness state and had that expectation that they were in the student role and ready to learn. Whereas the after-school groups might have had, energy from sitting in the classroom all day, and having them sit and meditate wasn't always the most effective. So having them before school started is a deal.
Yeah, and along with what Danielle's saying, some of our groups ran for a half hour to 1.5 hours, and those 1.5 hour groups were were the after school groups where they're really energetic, like ready to get out of class. So to ask students to sit there and meditate and be still and quiet for an hour and a half was a big don't. So we recommend you don't do that. Yes.
The amount of sessions that each group had also varied between 4 to 10 weeks. So we learned pretty quickly that the groups that had more sessions, usually 8 to 10 weeks, was a little bit better for us compared to groups that only had 4 to 6 sessions. The more sessions we had kind of allowed for us to have more time to build that relationship with the students and work at a steady pace rather than feeling rushed or kind of having to get through everything quicker. We also learned that smaller groups worked better, so typically groups of 5 to 10 students was a better buy-in factor, and when the groups got too large, some of the students began to lose focus or would pay attention more to what other people in the room were doing and not really be in the present moment and connect with themselves. So having small groups we found was more of a do.
Okay, so we also learned that using 2 co-facilitators or 2 instructors was a big deal. And that's because it also just helps support one another and be more mindful and present with the students rather than kind of feeling like you have to circle around everyone, having to kind of provide additional support so you can really be present with the students. And also because mindfulness does bring upon like trauma sometimes because we are really connecting the mind and body together. So sometimes students would be sitting there breathing or practicing a mindfulness exercise and then might be reminded of something from their past. So having 2 facilitators really allowed the other person to jump in and offer that individual support rather than bringing attention to the whole group, kind of making that person maybe feel ashamed or embarrassed about that trauma that's coming up. So 2 facilitators we felt was a big plus in that situation. But also because if we think about groups and kids, there's always one kid in every group that wants all the attention, right? They're going to try to bring all the attention on them and really just take that power away from you. So having a second person can really help minimize that power from that student and re-engage and join that student up to the group. So we felt that was really awesome to have 2 people rather than 1.
Were your groups optional?
No, they were mandatory groups too.
Oh, really?
Like the schools, we worked in the school settings, kind of identified students they felt that would benefit from learning mindfulness skills. So that's another huge thing. We wanted to tell them, like, we're on your side, you know, we don't want you to feel like this is mandatory or that we're out to get you, but more of like we're your friend and we want it to be a collaborative process. Yeah, for sure.
That's a great question, yeah. Some of the students, some of the students were okay with that and some definitely had
some resistance.
yes.
Did I see a question back there? We met once a week. We're going to get into that too. We met once a week for about a half hour. Yes, in the mornings.
So another do is obviously using age-appropriate language. So this is something important to keep in mind. So since mindfulness can be kind of a hard topic to sometimes define and explain to young students, we tend to use a lot of metaphors. And a lot of metaphors that we found was actually from a book called Wild Chickens and Petty Tyrants, 108 Metaphors for Mindfulness. So we're going to share some examples that we really liked and that we use most often with our groups. So the first one is, a dog will chase any old bone you throw it, no matter where you throw it or how far you throw it. A lion will just sit back and watch. Our minds can be like that dog, chasing after every thought or feeling. Mindfulness teaches us how to be like a regal lion, the king of the jungle, who's unshakable and steady and not afraid of anything. And for the second metaphor, we'll kind of explain this a little more too, but we actually made these mindfulness jars, so this is one that I actually made in one of our groups, and we can pass it around if you guys want to see it. But we used a metaphor the day of that we would usually make these groups, and that metaphor was that thoughts and feelings are like sparkles in a glass jar. In a glass jar of water that's been stirred up. Mindfulness practice allows the sparkles to settle to the bottom of the glass so the water is clear. So kind of explaining with how our thoughts can get stirred up and kind of crazy, and using mindfulness helps all the sparkles clear. So I can pass this around. So shake it and use it. So adapting language is obviously important for the child, and something else we found that was pretty important is over-explaining or doing too much details in like our activity, or basically if we were just talking too long. they would start to lose attention and lose focus. So,
because mindfulness is a pretty complex thing to try to explain to a kid, so you can easily go into like poetic language or try to think of extravagant ways to explain it to them, and they just lost focus completely. So a big don't is over-explaining, do more doing, less talking. It really helps for sure. So we also really, for any worksheet or handout that we provided, we really tried to make sure that the language was age comprehension, like fit the age comprehension. So we always adjusted our handouts all the time. That's a big deal. You can't just pull anything off the computer or use any old resource. You really want to make sure it's fitting that age range. So that's something we did and advise as a do.
So actually this week, Andrew and I both started a new round of mindfulness groups. So we are now each doing, not together unfortunately, but each doing our own mindfulness group and incorporating anger management. On Wednesday, I had my first session of an all-boys anger management with mindfulness group, and yesterday, Andrew had her first group with all girls anger management with mindfulness group. And we just think that separating the genders isn't really what we would prefer. We believe that mixing the genders to make it more inclusive and kind of show everyone that everyone can benefit from this. It doesn't have to be different how you teach anger management and mindfulness to boys versus girls. So that's just kind of a new thing that we actually just experienced this week.
Yeah, that we wanted to share. Also, we really want to encourage young boys to say it's okay to have feelings and it's okay to express sensitivity or any emotion, because usually boys in our society do get socialized to only feel anger or frustration and not express anything else. So we thought mixing the genders would be good and not just to divide them. Yeah. And then through our counseling program, we learned just how important building a therapeutic alliance really is. And we found it especially true when meeting our students in the mindfulness groups for the first time, as our groups were not starting right at the beginning of the school year, but actually several weeks into the school year. So these students already were building connections with teachers and peers, so we were brand new faces to them. So really building that connection we found to be extremely important. We wanted to be able to collaborate with them, and if we think about mindfulness practices, there is a really emotional vulnerability factor there. We're asking people to close their eyes and trust that we're not going to do anything to them, and we don't know what kind of backgrounds these children are coming from. So building that alliance for that trust when we're asking them to be emotionally vulnerable during mindfulness is really important. So we decided that we would use person-centered theory. It's a counseling theories approach, which incorporates actually a lot of mindfulness skills in it. So some of the factors in person-centered theory is unconditional positive regard that we express towards our students, and also using empathy to really validate how they feel and to be heard about how they feel, and to be genuine in our approach to the students to help them feel safe and comfortable. And we noticed that when we used this person-centered theory, that students became more open and really formed strong therapeutic relationships with us quickly, so that because we have such limited time, we're able to make that connection and really dive into the work and not have to wait quite so long.
And then finally, we're journal entries. We do a lot of journaling, so just a way for them to reflect on their day or what they were experiencing. Sometimes we did it before session, sometimes we did it after, but usually, engaging in questions such as right now and just give them that prompt and then kind of see where they take it, just to kind of have them reflect on the present moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of adults don't always slow down to really just pay attention to the students. So we want them to come in and we want them to know we're going to pay attention to them and what's up in their world, and not just jump in and teach them something. So doing this really allowed them to say what's on their mind, so they could focus then on the exercises.
And so now that we shared some of the do's and don'ts, we're going to explain a little more of our actual work with these groups. I'm going to be this for a second. This is okay, right? So while working as a community partner in the schools, we were asked to conduct some research to kind of see if the schools, give them an idea of how helpful or valuable this was for the students. And some of the schools were actually interested in writing grant proposals to kind of fund that more social, emotional support.
So because we were asked to do this, we felt a huge need to form a curriculum that would benefit students and also our research for the school. So in doing so, we were instructed by some graduate professors to get these books called The Way of Mindful Education and the workbook. We can pass those around so you guys can see. You can order them on Amazon for a bundle. I think it's like $40 to do that. But this is where we really grounded our curriculum in. But we did adapt a lot too. This just really helped with our first test trial because we had never done it before. So we wanted to make sure we weren't just, doing any old thing. We wanted to make sure it was resourceful and credible. And coming from a counseling background, we don't really have a background in teaching or educating, so we wanted to make sure we were doing something that was productive and kind of followed that education style because that's what students are really used to. So these books, The Way of Mindful Education and the Mindful Education Workbook. And in those books, the main text, there's 4 overarching sections, and within each section there's different available lessons. So those ones, the first one we start with is embodiment, and this is because students can gain the language of their physical sensations, and students need to feel safe and secure in their own bodies before they can truly learn to collaborate and have emotional regulation. We begin by supporting the students to feel comfortable and connected and relaxed in their own bodies. And from there, we move to attention lessons, where we can have students focus on cultivating that attention, and we work with various sensory phenomena, such as the breath and also the sound, to stabilize attention. And the practice that cultivate the capacity to really learn and focus on their schoolwork and other activities. But this attention is also a key building block for emotional regulation and responsible decision making. And from there, we can move to heartfulness lessons. So once students kind of have these fundamental skills, they can bring their awareness to how they feel, and they can start to identify and name their emotions. They can also learn joy and compassion and really build upon that. And then from there, we move to section 4 of interconnection lessons. So students, now they've got a really well-developed framework and foundation, they can learn how to apply that to their everyday lives and everything that they do to help reduce frustration, discomfort in their body, and other difficulties that come up with everyday life. And the last part is integration lessons. It's a 5th section, but there are no lessons in the book. But we like to think of these as little homeworks assignments, like practice mindful brushing your teeth, or doing your laundry, or doing the dishes. Like, how can you be mindful walking your dog? So we try to invite them to do some homework to really apply it for the integration part. And we think that the order matters. So it is scaffolded. That means like one builds upon the next. We found it to be important because they start to feel comfortable in their own bodies, so they can really engage. Before we ask them to sit still and quiet, and then that cultivates a secure base where they can really focus on the realms of their heart, and then they can integrate that outward into their own life. So we felt that it kind of built inner to outer. So each section, like I said, there's 4. They're readily available in the book. So there's 16 lessons you can use right away. However, we were not able to do all 16 because the school only allowed us to do so many sessions at a time. They started us off with 4 to 5 sessions, which we felt just wasn't enough. So we requested that we could do at least 8 to 10. Luckily, they approved that, but they wouldn't let us do any more after that. So we recommend you do all 16 and see if there's any more improvement. But because of our limited amount of time, we did 2 sessions per section, if that makes sense. So we're going to show you what the order would look like if you were to use all 16. So you can see there, those are the 4 sections, and the book does a really lovely job to break it down really concisely to 4 sessions within each one. But before we jump right into the sessions, we're not going to go over all of them, only 1 per section. We want to show you what we did. We kind of created a framework for each session. That way students kind of knew what to expect when they come in. We want to be really mindful if they were kind of having some anxiety or worry about what are they going to do today, what's going on. So we came up with a framework of what to kind of do. So we always opened up with a mindful moment, which are those check-ins we just talked about, like the rosebud thorn, the scaling question, maybe doing a journal entry. And then we did a check-in on what we called our worldly discovery, which are those little homework assignments I was talking about just a second ago. They say, how did your homework go? How did you bring mindfulness into your everyday life? And then we moved to 3. We introduced a new technique, and then we practice it. And then after that, we have a little conversation about how that was, so there's time for reflection. And then from there, we introduce a new worldly discovery, like how we learned today can be applied to their everyday life. So, like I said, this really helped reduce any worry. Some students don't really want to engage in things if they don't have an expectation on what is going to happen. So we thought if we did this, it might reduce that a bit.
So we would usually start our sessions off with icebreakers, and so just to share a couple that we really like. The first one is spirit animal, so we would just ask them, if you could be any animal, what would you be and why? And then we would try to build connections between students who had animals in a similar animal family. So like if someone shared that they felt like they were a lion, we would connect that to someone who felt like they identified as a tiger. And then the mindful toilet paper one is just kind of a silly one. So basically what we would do is we would pass around a roll of toilet paper and tell the students to pick as many squares as they think they would need. And once everyone had their wad of toilet paper, for every square that they had, we would have them or ask them to share something about themselves. And of course we explained to them, they didn't have to disclose anything, they didn't feel comfortable, only what they did feel comfortable sharing. And so that was just kind of a funny one. They usually are like, I picked 10 pieces of toilet paper and now I have to share 10 things compared to someone who only picked 2. Yeah, so just kind of a silly one.
Right, and we would do it with them too. We would pick up maybe a bunch to kind of share first. That way they felt comfortable talking too. And that way students could kind of get to know us a little and show that we have connections as well with kids. So we picked the embodiment lesson of mindful balloon toss. This actually wasn't in the book, it's something we came up with. So we kind of asked students to take really big deep breaths and on their exhale to blow up a balloon. So we bring balloons to our session, and as we were taking big deep breaths, they blow up a balloon, and after it's inflated, we have them make a circle, and we ask them to use all of their body to keep this balloon up in the air. So they're being really present in the moment with their mind and body to keep this balloon up. So they might use their shoulders or their head, their elbow, their arms, whatever they can use to keep this balloon up. And then we bring it down, and we say you can only now use your arms and your fingertips. And we'll set a timer for like 3 minutes or so. And from there, we'll say, now you can only use your fingertips. So we're making it a little bit more difficult, really fine-tuning those motor skills. And then at the end, if there's time, we'll let them partner up with someone so they can kind of focus on 2 people now. And then to make it even harder, we might add more balloons. So that's something we do. We found this to be really beneficial with our boys groups. We found the boys, they didn't really like to sit and just breathe. They want to go up and do something. So we really had to always be thinking of new ways we can engage our boys. So this one they really liked. And I'll show you a couple of pictures. This is what it might look like to blow up the balloon, and then that's what it looks like when you're actually playing. And we'll come back to this one at the end.
So the mindful listening, that's what you all did at the beginning of our session. So in this session, we would first invite the students to kind of pay attention of the noises outside. So maybe they heard the buses leaving or arriving or students yelling. Then we would invite them to listen to the sounds in the room. So maybe they heard the heat turning on or the clock ticking. And then we would move on and invite them to pay attention to the sounds in their own bodies. So the sounds of their own breath, or if it was before school and they hadn't eaten breakfast and their tummies were grumbling, just to kind of bring them into that moment. And just like you all did, we would use the gong, have them raise their hand, but usually we would do it for a little bit longer, about 5 to 10 minutes, kind of depending. And then just discuss how it was for them, what they noticed about themselves, and talk about how sometimes sounds can also be triggering. And if something does trigger you, what can you do to help yourself in that moment?
Just a little picture. Okay, so then this is section 3, heartfulness. So one thing we did in our boys group, there was a lot of bullying going on. So once we got to this section, we really wanted to emphasize heartful communication. So these are heartful phrases. We really invited our students to think about a time when someone did something really nice for them, and then to really hold that memory in their mind's eye, and to notice how it feels in their heart when they think about this memory, and to really like fill up their body with that feeling. And then to tell that person that they have that memory of that may you be happy. And to imagine that this person is smiling and content and just really in a good place in their life. And then we invited them to say the following statements. May you be healthy, may you be safe, may you be content, and may you be at peace. And then we asked those students to look inward and say those statements to themselves.
How did the boys versus the girls take that?
Those boys, surprisingly, they actually liked it. And then we checked in with the Worldly Discovery the next time, and the students that were bullying and having conflict became friends. And then they were hanging out in the hallway and walking to the bus together. We were really surprised that it made a difference. So we liked that. We were surprised.
Yeah, especially for that being our first group and for boys who were having issues to have a significant change we definitely weren't expecting, but were pleasantly surprised.
It was our first group that we did this with.
So the next one is an interconnection lesson, and this is mindful communication. So basically what we would do is invite the students to sit for a few minutes, taking deep breaths and kind of anchoring themselves to the present moment. We then ask them to listen to what they could hear, the noises, to pay attention to the sensations throughout their bodies, and just kind of checking in with their emotions. And then we would ask them to kind of pay attention to their awareness of what was happening around them and speak mindfully of that. So we would go around the circle, usually starting with the instructors, and looking inward, saying, in the present moment, I am aware of. And so maybe they would choose a sensation or an emotion or something that they had noticed about themselves. And we would encourage them to not think about what they were going to say while they're waiting for their turn, just that they could be present, with the person speaking and not so focused on if they were anxious about what they were going to say. And we felt like this kind of helped them to attend to their own sensations, but also learn how to check in with one another and just attend to what was happening around them and being mindful of others.
Yeah, like a lot of our students didn't know how to talk to somebody about how they were feeling or felt that they couldn't. So a lot of the students, the next time we'd come in before we got started, they'd be like, how are you doing? Like, how are you feeling? And it was cool to have them really talk mindfully to one another in a way that they've never really been taught how to do before. So we really liked that session. Okay, so this is an integration lesson in section 5. So we came up with this one called the hot cocoa meditation. And the hot cocoa meditation we did around the holiday season, just to kind of celebrate that winter is coming up, winter break's approaching. But also, what can they do over winter break? We're not going to meet for a few weeks. We wanted to offer them something they could try at home, just to kind of bring their sessions to their everyday life again. So we started by asking students, do you drink to survive? What do you drink every day? And do you really think about drinking? So we brought in hot cocoa, candy canes, marshmallows, and we filled all of our mugs, and we sat in a circle, and we invited them to smell the hot chocolate, and to breathe in that smell really big and deep, and then to breathe out to cool off that hot cocoa. And then we asked them to bring their mugs close to them, and bring their cups up to their face, and feel the heat on their face, but not smelling at this time, just feeling. And then we allowed them to put the cup on their lips and see what that felt like. And then to put the liquid in their mouth and notice their desire to drink and what it feels like when they're drinking. And then what it feels like to swallow, and so on and so forth. So we really extended out that process of just drinking hot cocoa. So we're actually going to invite you guys to do a hot cocoa meditation with us, but it's going to be a little adapted. So if you could go back into your mindful bodies like you did earlier, with your feet on the ground, your back resting against your chair, and your hands in your lap. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, if not, just look downward. So I want you to imagine that you have a cup of hot cocoa in your hands. You can kind of hold it if you want to. And I want you to imagine what your hot cocoa looks like. What color is your mug? What's in your hot cocoa? Do you have marshmallows in it? What about sprinkles? Maybe a candy cane? Really just envision your hot cocoa. When you're ready, you can bring it a little closer to your face. Really breathe in your hot cocoa. Take a big deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth, cooling it off. As you breathe in, slowly count to 4 in your head. And breathe out to cool it off. Slowly count to 4 again. Maybe your hot cocoa is cooling off now. How heavy is your hot cocoa in your hands? Just continue taking big, deep breaths. Really smell the chocolate. Maybe smell the marshmallows. When you're on your last exhale, you can put your mug down. You go ahead and bring yourselves back. And you can open your eyes when you're ready. So that's a variation of the hot cocoa meditation we would do. We actually created this little take-home for the winter season for our kiddos. We put them in a little envelope with like a greeting card as like a little gift and something that they could practice on their own. So we really enjoyed it, and we gave it to the school counselors to pass out too.
This is probably one of my favorite ones that we've done, and I think the kids have really seemed to enjoy this one a lot. Probably because they get to have hot chocolate in school, but whatever makes it work.
Yeah, just be prepared for the sugar high afterwards. You can send them on your way back to class. But another cool one we did was the pinwheel meditation. We actually created pinwheels in session. As we were creating them, it does take a little bit of time, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes. We did our check-ins during that time. Just like we said, we only had a half hour. And then once it was created, we invited them to take big deep breaths and watch the pinwheel blades spin around. And then again, they can keep it in their locker or at home in their backpacks whenever they need that little break. They can whip it out to practice.
So the butterfly body scan, this was a pretty fun one we did as well. We would have the students choose a color of butterfly, same thing kind of like with hot cocoa, they could kind of picture that in their head, what it would look like. Then we would kind of direct them through and have them imagine butterflies are flying around, and then we would pick a place on the body where the butterfly may land. And when the butterfly lands there, we would kind of ask, just noticing that, being present with where the butterfly lands, and then go through different parts of the body, like shoulders, legs, toes, just kind of like a whole body scan. And then the mindfulness stars, which we pass around. So these ones are always really fun. Really easy, as you all saw. You just kind of take a mason jar, or we suggest if you are working with students, probably plastic. Gatorade bottles are really helpful because they do have the bigger holes, so you can fit more in there. I've seen a lot of mindfulness jars that have like little plastic toys in them, maybe for some younger kids. And then you just shake it up and put whatever else. So glitter glue, sparkles, really anything that they enjoy. And we always get food coloring, and similar to the pinwheels, we'll kind of check in with them and talk as we do it, and just keep them in the present moment, but also make it as like a take-home, something fun to do.
And it gives them choice too. Like students don't really have a lot of choices, so they have a lot of autonomy to decide what they want in their jar and what they want it to look like. And then now we're going to switch over to our research side. So we kind of showed you what we did and how we scaffolded some of the sessions, but now we're going to move over to the research and what we found to be helpful when conducting it and what the outcomes were. So in the Way of Mindfulness Education workbook, the one that's going around, that larger one on page 109, there was a self-report measurement. It's more of a reflection tool, so just to see where they're at. We administered it 3 times. The first session at the beginning, and then midway through our sessions and on the last day. And it's only 11 questions total front to back, so it doesn't take too much time for them to answer. We administered it at the beginning of the sessions, and we found this to be helpful because we didn't want to do it at the end where we're already practicing mindfulness, and that might put them in a better headspace than at the beginning. We wanted them to really come in and see where they're at as they're coming in rather than where they're at when they're leaving. If that makes sense. And all the questions are on a scale of 1 to 10. And we adapted the language from the textbook because some of the words were a little larger. So again, just be mindful of your audience and how old they are and if they'll understand it. So these are some of the assessment questions. Well, they're really all of them. We're just gonna go through a couple. So the first one is stress reduction. What was your stress level like today? Empathy, how nice were you to other people today? Metacognition, how busy was your mind today? And so on and so forth. These are what our assessments look like, so we can just circle the number. This is what our mid and post assessment looked like. It's just a little different. We included what practices did you try today or during your past week and for how long. And this gave us a sense of students were actually practicing. So sometimes they leave it blank. They were pretty honest. I didn't do any practices, right? Or they said I did the mindfulness jar or did the butterfly body scan. And that gave us a sense of what they really liked so we can continue practicing them in later sessions. And we tracked all of our assessments in an Excel spreadsheet so that we could compare from pre, mid to post and clearly see, such and such was at an 8 at the beginning and it increased to a 10, or maybe it decreased. So that also gave us as counselors an idea of, okay, this individual is decreasing, maybe we can get them some additional support, or we can check in with their teacher so the teacher can be checking in with that student too. So this is a mid one, and this is a post. So the not available too, we were able to kind of see then which students are not coming to session and how we can get those students back engaged as well. So if there are lots of not availables, that told us, okay, these students aren't participating, what can we do to get them back on track? But outside of just that self-report measurement, we asked the school administration to support our research by providing us with the students' data twice, once at the beginning of our sessions and then on the last day of sessions. So the students, we got their grade letters and all their core classes, their attendance, their behavioral referrals and tardies, and then we kept track of how many times they attended the sessions to see if that would make a difference. So a student who only came 3 times might not benefit as much as someone who came all times. And again, we track these in an Excel spreadsheet like this. Remove the names for confidentiality so they can be protected. And a lot of our schools used only letter grades, so we had to create a percentage to really see what's the difference between an A and a B, or vice versa. A minus. We found that there were positive outcomes from this study. Oh, we're actually going to disclaim something first.
Well, we are running out of time, so real quick disclaimer. Of course, this is kind of specific to our groups and our specific school district based off our own experiences. This may vary across different populations, depending on age, institution, or other factors. We're not implying that this is causational, it's more correlational, and we can't prove that mindfulness had an increase or decrease in their students' grades or behavior.
Right. But we did find some outcomes from our research, but we can't say that mindfulness helped them with this. They might have just had a good day when they came in, or they got to see their best friend at the beginning of group and that made it a better day. But we did find that mindfulness might have helped with an increase in self-compassion, or how kind they were to themselves or others, an increase in contentment or having a more balanced mood, an increase in emotional self-regulation, and they had a less busy mind. So we think that perhaps our scaffolded learning curriculum might have helped aid with some of this stuff, but then again, we can't say for sure that it did. On the last day, we gave out these certificate of achievements just to help promote feelings of success and accomplishment. We hand signed them to give more of a personal touch. And then it also promoted attendance. We would kind of say on the first day, if you complete this mindfulness program, you're going to get an award at the end. So some token economy was added with that. And also kind of gave students a sense of, I'm an expert now, so I can teach other students or my teachers or parents or siblings too.
So then, Andrew kind of mentioned this, but we would hand out the feedback surveys, which was also kind of a way to invite the students to give us feedback, so what they enjoyed about the group, what they didn't enjoy. We always encourage them to be honest, since we are still new to the field and still learning, so it was helpful to kind of hear their feedback. Most of the time we got positive feedback. They liked the group, or maybe there was an activity that they didn't like, so we modified going into the future. Which was helpful, and then it also kind of gives students a little bit of power to really voice their opinions and know that we're going to take it seriously.
And then on the last day, we tried to give them some resources of some of the resources we use on our own. So there were some pros and cons to these. We suggested the Calm app or Headspace. A pro was that it does help students continue using mindfulness on their own, but a con is that you do have to pay for it. There's a subscription. A lot of students we work with can't afford that, or they have to get consent from a parent. Another pro is that it's guided meditation. It is really credible, so they're not looking at things that might not be helpful. And another con is that it's using technology, and if we're trying to cultivate presence and mindfulness, technology kind of does the opposite, diverts attention and focus. So those were some of the drawbacks we found with that.
Yeah. So we passed around those books, but these are really what we found to be most helpful when planning our groups. So they're here in case any of you guys are interested in using them. We really enjoy them, so we wanted to share them with you as well.
No, you're good. Thank you. Sorry, switch.
Any questions?
You said the school mandated it, so you kind of went in with the fun start, uphill battle. Did they get permission from parents?
They do, yeah. The parents sign off on a contract. They do approve of it beforehand. But if the student doesn't want to participate, we always tell the school, we're not going to be offended or our feelings won't be hurt. We don't want students to be there if they feel forced or they're just really not into it. So we have had attrition where students just drop out.
Was there a parent involved? Basically working on children. Here's what you can do, support at home.
No, there isn't too much communication with the parents when it's in a group setting. We communicate more with the parents for individual, but I think that's definitely a good thing we could try in the future. I like that idea. Any other questions?
How many students do you think did not complete it that started? Do you have any?
I would say in most cases, all the groups did. In our last groups we ran, there was 3 girls who dropped out, but it was a 15 group. So out of 15, 3 stopped. But I don't know if it was so much because of us or the administration. So the administration, because of confidentiality, has to call the students out from their classrooms. And they're dealing a lot with the school administration kind of saying, like, you need to go to group, or almost being kind of forcing them, that feeling. So we don't
So there's no anonymity among their peers who are going. I mean, they're being called by someone out of the classroom to go to this.
Yeah, but they don't ever say where. They'll say, such and such, please report to this room. Never for why. And it's a room that is an old room that no one really uses either. I don't think the method in that is generally the greatest, but unfortunately we don't have a huge say over that. It's more so the school sets that part up. Yeah, but we don't ever go to the classrooms and pull students out because of confidentiality, which is why the secretaries or other people kind of help facilitate that.
Did you say, you might have said, what time of day do you do the group?
We do it in the mornings. Yeah, we don't do after school groups anymore because we found it not to be helpful. So we do it in the mornings right before school starts. Yeah. And that kind of helps them get into the day too, start their day off.
So they're not missing academic time.
No.
It's usually like 10 minutes before school actually starts. So then by the time they do get to their first period, they don't miss too much.
Yeah, they might miss the first 5 minutes of class. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned occasionally you would trigger a student who might have some PTSD stuff going on. Do you pull them out and say, here, I'm going to offer you these outside resources, or do you try to fold them back into the group and continue?
I think it's like a both situation. We don't want to take that student out of the group, just because, again, like we don't want to promote feelings of like shame or embarrassment. So they'll still stick with the group for like the remaining sessions, but we'll get them individual support too.
Do you have a specific strategy then to help them be part of it without triggering the response, or was it just simply the group itself? Or
Yeah.
did you shift?
Yeah, we use like
I've heard focusing on the breath can actually trigger that response, so you can switch it up with noise or some other focal.
we use a lot of grounding techniques. A lot of times if a student is experiencing trauma, they're like dissociating. So we'll say like, listen to the sound of my voice, right? Yeah, they might kind of dissociate, like they looks like they're there, but they're really not, right? So you might say like, listen to the sound of my voice. You let them know where they're at. We're in this room, at this school. This is today's date. You know, this is the time, and it kind of draws them back to where they're at. And that seems to be really helpful. Or even doing grounding techniques like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is really helpful too for students. Those are the two that we really use the most.
The time is actually, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the 3:28, so we want to get done for
Definitely.